Do all snare drums actually sound the same? And if they do you really have to tune them? What is going on, everybody? Nick Costa here, and welcome to this video on how to tune a snare drum. This is a great video for those of you who are just starting out in your drumming journey and might be unfamiliar with tuning, or if you're a fellow educator who doesn't have a background in drumming, this is a great video to get you started with tuning a snare drum. So in this video, I'm going to go over my tuning method for a snare drum. I'm going to go through the entire process, including removing your snare wires, your top and bottom head, putting new top and bottom heads on, and then tuning. So in this video, I will be using the Ludwig 6.5x14 pewter over copper Copperphonic snare drum. Since getting this drum back in January, it has become one of the primary snares that I use. Now, when I received this drum, I did a demo video with the stock heads from Ludwig. But just like everything else that's a wearable item, over time, it no longer does its job to its fullest potential, and you need to replace it. So in this case, I have to replace both the top and bottom head of this snare drum. Let's go ahead and get started with the process. So when it comes to replacing the heads on a snare drum, my personal preference is actually a Remo Ambassador X coated for the top and a regular Ambassador snare side for the bottom. With this drum, however, I'm noticing that with this Ludwig heavy head, as it was starting to wear in the center, I was starting to get a little bit of a harsh overtone with it. Now that could be because of the fact that the drum head itself was starting to wear out. Could also be because it was starting to get a little bit thinner as it was wearing out as well. So just to be safe with this particular drum, I'm going to go with a head that is slightly heavier. And this time around, we are going to put a Remo controlled sound coated head on the top. As always, I am going to put a Remo Ambassador snare side for the bottom. So step number one, when you are replacing the heads on your snare drum, what I usually do is I will go over to the snare throw off. I will lower it and then I will loosen it just a couple turns to get the snares to not be as tight on the bottom. So you'll notice now that they are kind of hanging freely and not really connecting with the bottom head. The reason why I do this is because you have to remove these snare wires from the drum, and then this will make it much easier when you have to put them back on. You don't have to loosen them all the way. You also don't need to make sure that the wires aren't making contact with that bottom head. I just do that because that's my preference. So once you do that, you go ahead and take your drum key and you loosen the tension rods that are holding the snare wires together. Almost 9 out of 10 modern day drums are using this type. Older drums, however, they use different types of screws, whether it is a Phillips or flathead style screw. So just make sure that you take a look before you get started to see if you need a drum key or a screwdriver. We'll disengage the throw off. Now you'll notice here, in this case, with my snare wires, they are using a nylon strap. There are some times that you use string. If for some reason you notice that if it is a nylon strap, if you see that it is starting to fall apart or that it broke, string works just fine. This is also a perfect time to inspect your snare wires. Make sure that they're not completely warped and out of funk. Also make sure that they're not breaking anywhere. These are actually in really good shape, so we're just going to put them off to the side. A lot of times when people think that their drum sounds bad, they replace the top head. However, the bottom head plays a huge factor in your drum tone. You can see here, this is the stock head from Ludwig. You can see there are still some marks from the snares rubbing up against this bottom head. I'm sure it's in okay shape, but since we're replacing the top head, we might as well replace both. So, just like any drum, when you are tuning, if you go to detune the drum, you want to go in a cross star style pattern. You don't want to loosen in a circle because then what you're doing is detuning one side of the drum at a time. And although you're doing this fairly quickly and it's not taking too long, you run the possibility of having too much tension on one side of the drum compared to the other. By doing this cross star pattern like I am doing here, you'll notice that you actually loosen the head in a more even layout. Now, while you are doing this, you just want to make sure that you loosen with the drum key to the point that you can then loosen the rest of the way by hand. Once you do that, check, make sure, and then you can just pick up the hoop with the tension rods on it, put it on a surface where they don't fall out, and remove the head. Once you do that, this is a perfect time to examine the actual bearing edge, especially because over time you'll notice that you can get some dust and debris, which if it is sitting on that bearing edge surface, even if it is minor, it can make a difference. So you can see here, if you look carefully, there is a little bit of something on this bearing edge, most likely stick shavings and some dust as well. So I'm gonna get a microfiber cloth and we're just gonna clean and wipe down the bearing edge. All right, so you can just take a microfiber cloth and you go ahead and you can wipe. That's going to get rid of any of that stuff that is stuck on the edge of your drum. Also looks like there's some kind of grease. Now, while you have this head off, this is a perfect time to wipe down the drum, get rid of any dust, any stick shavings. I know a few of you might be cringing because I just wiped down that bearing edge and now I'm wiping down the drum with the same microfiber cloth. It is what it is. Once you do that, it is now time to put that bottom head on. Like I mentioned before, I am a fan of the Ambassador snare side by Remo. You'll notice that you have the logo. I like to have that logo facing where the badge is on the drum itself. You don't have to do that, but you can. Now, when you go to add the hoop, you want to make sure that the cutouts for your snare wires actually line up with your throw off and your butt plate. It doesn't matter what side is which. The cutouts are the same size. You just want to make sure that they line up. Before you do that, however, go ahead and take that microfiber cloth one more time and wipe around where that one flange is on the inside, just to make sure that there isn't anything stuck on the hoop. From there, again, making sure this lines up. Now, before you get started with tightening the tension rods, you want to make sure that they actually are all lined up with your lug. Once you confirm that that is the case, you then, just like when you loosen the tension rods, you tighten them in a cross pattern so you get equal tension across the drum, rather than in a circle where you then put tension on one side before you do the other. Before you grab your drum key, however, this is the perfect time. You go around and you just finger tighten. I usually go ahead and finger tighten until I cannot anymore. That's going to get you as close as you possibly can to equal tension for all of your tension rods. So again, you'll notice here that I am going in a cross star pattern. Now, once you do that with all of the lugs, go ahead and go around the drum and just check to make sure that you cannot finger tighten them anymore. You will notice there are times that once you get all of them finger tightened, that you do have a little bit more room with some of them because of the fact that you now have that equal tension. Once you do that, take a look at the drum. You'll notice you have a little bit of wrinkling throughout. You might not notice that, but it is extremely minor. From there, this is where we take our drum key and we now start tightening in a star pattern. I myself like to do a full turn first and then go from there. You'll also notice as you do this, some of your tension rods will become loose again, which is totally fine. If you notice that's the case, go ahead and just tighten by finger first before you do the full turn. Okay, once you do that, you might notice now that you have some wrinkles. Most of the time you don't. In this case, we do not have any wrinkles, so we are good to go. From there, we want to actually help seat the head to the bearing edge. So what I'll usually do is, if you do have a head that came in a bag, great. If not, just grab a microfiber cloth or a towel and place that on top of the head first. That way, if you have any of the grease from the tension rods or the lugs, you're not smearing it all over the head, and you're going to pretend as if you're doing CPR to the drum. So place both hands in the center, and you're just going to apply a little bit of pressure. You do that a couple times. That's helping stretch the head out a little bit, but it's also helping seat the head to the bearing edge. Luckily for us, this is a fairly new metal drum from Ludwig, so the bearing edge should be in actually pretty good shape. Now from here, I actually do an additional half turn once I do that. The reason why is because when you're stretching that head, you're actually going to get the pitch to go a little bit lower. Okay, so now from here, this is where you start to fine tune. I myself prefer to have my bottom head be a little bit more on the tighter side, closer to tabletop tension. And the reason why I do that is because I feel that that gives me a quicker, sharper snare response than if the bottom head is actually looser. What I'll usually do is I will just kind of feel in the middle. You can feel there's some decent tension, but there is some give to that head. Also, if you take your finger and just tap close to where that bearing edge and the tension rod is located, you get a pitch. What you want to do now is just kind of go around and make sure that all of these areas are the same pitch. You can hear this one's much higher. So you go around and you just check to make sure that they are all the same pitch. Now, when you are checking pitch, if you get a pitch for 1, go across and try and make sure that this one is matched. You can hear they're close. This one's a little bit lower. Now, instead of tightening this even further, check the ones to the side of it, and that actually affects the pitch as well. Now, the one thing you might also notice when you're trying to match the pitch of all of those tension rods, you might notice that the ones where the snare wires go through are going to be a little bit lower pitch. Keep in mind that depending on the company, depending on the type of the drum, you're going to have different types of bearing edges cut into it. Some of them are longer than others, and some of them are deeper than others. So if you need to, you may have to make them a little bit tighter. If you notice that those particular ones are a different pitch, maybe a little bit lower, that could be totally okay too. You just want to make sure that this bottom head is a tabletop tension and that there are no wrinkles anywhere along the edge of the head. This seems pretty good, so it's now time to reapply the snare wires. Now, if you are using snare wires that have the nylon strap, a lot of times you'll see that they actually start to have creases in them from when they are applied to both the throw off and the butt plate. A lot of the times the nylon wires for the throw off side have a little bit of a hook to them because they go through the bottom and then they loop back around and tighten. So you want to just make sure that you keep an eye on that. You don't have to put them back in the same spot, but it does make it a lot easier. In order to get them on the throw off, let's remove that so you can see it again. You'll notice here that you actually have a plate. So if I loosen these just a little bit more, you can see that there's some space there. Now, the plate on the outside, there's a cutout. So you place both through, so it goes in between the two parts, and then the top part loops back through that front and just goes into place like so. From there, you can finger tighten. You don't want to tighten all the way, however, because we are going to have to adjust this once we get the other side in. You just want to make sure it's tight enough that it holds in place. Now, once you do that, you can go over to the other side, and it's the same concept here. So again, you have two parts, both top and bottom of your nylon strap go through, and then you hold it in place like so. Now, when you are doing this, you want to make sure that your snare wires are actually straight and in line. You don't want to actually have them off to the side and crooked, because then you are going to get a little bit of sympathetic buzz because they're not sitting on the drum straight. Now you'll see here that that original mark was a little bit lower. So in this case, I'm going to just adjust this again so that lines up. Go ahead and tighten with a drum key. Now, you don't want to go too crazy with it, but you just want to make sure that that's tight. Now from here, you can go back and readjust. Now keep in mind that we did loosen the tension on the snare wires, so when we do reapply this, so you'll notice when we do actually reapply the wires back to the drum, that they're not going to actually sit against the head. Now that you do that, you can re-engage them. You'll also notice they are still hanging off that bottom head. So from here, you can actually loosen, and then you turn it clockwise. You'll notice that they actually start to raise. Best part about these P88 throw-offs is that they have these notches built in to lock it in place so you don't have to worry about it coming loose as you are playing. Fantastic design, super smooth. That's pretty good for right now. So now that that's good, we are going to take care of the top head. So just like the bottom head, take your drum key and you are going to loosen in a cross pattern. Again, get to a point where you then can continue the process by hand. Now you can see here that this head, it actually did pretty good. I got this drum back in January and have had this head on ever since. Done a ton of videos, a few recording sessions, things of that nature. You can see here the head actually held up really well from the factory. And the drum sounded good, and that's why I didn't replace it until now. Now that you have removed the head, just like you did before, you want to inspect your bearing edge. You want to get rid of any of the stick shavings, any dust, anything like that. You can see there was a little bit of rub here from the collar of the drum head onto the shell. That's no big deal. The main thing that you want to focus on here is the actual bearing edge itself, where the head makes contact with the drum shell. This is another perfect time to take your cloth and wipe down the drum, get rid of any dust, any additional stick shavings, things like that. Now, just like that bottom head, you take your top head, look where your logo is, and make sure that it lines up with your badge. Again, this isn't necessary. I just prefer to do this. Now, just like you did with the bottom hoop, you want to make sure you go around and you do actually wipe down your top hoop. The reason why is because if you do rim shots like I do when you play the snare drum, you are going to get stick shavings, and you don't want to have any of that caked up along the edge of the hoop. Now, although this part isn't really necessary, if you are particular, you might be able to take a look at your hoop and you can see some stick marks and scratches and things of that nature. So you just want to make sure, if you want to be particular and isolate them to where you play your rim shots, you take a look and you place them back in the same location. Necessary, but if you want to, you can do that. Now, just like you did with the bottom head, make sure that all of your tension rods line up with your lugs. And then again, in a cross star pattern, finger tighten, and then move on to the next set. Once you have them all down, again, just like last time, go around, check them again, because as you provide tension across the lugs, sometimes you'll notice that some of them are a little bit looser than others. This gives you the best and closest equal starting point. Now, once you do that, go ahead and take your drum key just like before. I still like to do one full turn. Now, as you're doing this, if you start to hear some cracks and crackles, that's totally fine. That's the collar of the head actually starting to seat on the shell itself. Don't have to worry about it. So just like before, check, see if there are any wrinkles anywhere. There's a little bit of a divot here, so we're gonna tighten this tension rod just a hair more. Okay, and just like before, you can either place the bag, or if you have your cloth that you were using, put that on top, and again, just press on the center. It's helping seat the head just a little bit. Now from there, this is where we really start to tune this top head. I myself like my snares to be a little bit more on the medium tight side. So with that being said, I want to make sure that as I continue to tune this, I don't just go for broke and do multiple turns on each tension rod at one shot. Because again, you don't want to put too much pressure on one particular point. So just like before, take your drum key, and I'm going to stick again to a full turn. Now that I did that, now I'm going to check and make sure that I have equal tension. In this case, since I have it toweled down, it should be muffling that bottom head, but I'm disengaging the snares just to be safe. And again, take a finger, tap near the bearing edge where each tension rod is, and you'll get your pitches. Make sure they all match, and you're good to go. Now, if you have a drum that has a little bit of that resonating overtone, case in point, if you are messing with a metal drum, there are times where you will start to hear the overtone rather than the initial pitch for the tension rod. For example. So, to make sure that you are hearing the pitch and not the overtone, you can just lightly press 2 or 3 fingers on the center of the drum head, and that'll help muffle those overtones so you can hear the pitch a little bit better. I feel like this is getting a little too high, so we're going to back this one out a bit. Now, as you're doing this, make sure that whatever lug you hit first and you're using as your guidance, make sure you continue to use that particular lug to get the rest to match. If you're noticing, for example, that this lug is higher than the rest and you're going to tighten the rest of them and you're noticing this one's starting to go up as well, if you feel that it's getting too high of a pitch, back it out a little bit and then check them again. Of course, since we're dealing with tension throughout the drum, when you adjust one of these lugs, it does affect the other ones around it. So if this is higher than these two, and then you go to tighten these two and this one goes up just a little bit with it, Back it out just a little bit further down, and you should get closer to pitch between them. All right, so now that's pretty close. So now it is time to bring the drum over to the drum set and see where we are. You may notice that this top head might be a little bit too high in pitch. That's where you'll go and just fine tune and lower it a little bit if you need to. Now, if I notice that this drum is too high in pitch, I will do anything from a slight loosening twist for each tension rod or a complete quarter turn for each one of them. Just keep in mind when you are adjusting these tension rods, a little bit goes a long way, especially when you have a 10 lug drum. So just a very minor adjustment throughout all 10 lugs is going to make a huge pitch difference. But enough of me talking, let's get this over to the drum kit and let's get it dialed in. Now that I have the snare drum back on the kit, this goes out to all of you who are fairly new to playing drums or just might not be familiar with it. When you go to put the snare on the basket of your snare stand, you want to make sure that these arms here are not getting in the way of your throw off. There are times where people don't pay attention, they just put the drum down. Next thing you know, you have an arm rubbing up against either the wire strap, the throw off itself, and next thing you know, the drum sounds completely weird because it's affecting the tone of the drum. So what I usually will do is you will see that little window where your throw off and butt plate are. Obviously you have it on one side and then directly across on the other side. I like to make sure that these arms aren't even in this window here. You might notice that it's slightly here on the side. So here it's in the middle, we're good. You can see here it's slightly off to the right, which is totally fine as long as it's not putting any tension on a tension rod. And then the third one you can see here is right on the edge, which is also totally fine because it's not making any contact with that tension rod. So you are good to go. Once you do that, you can re-engage the snares and you're good to go. So step number one is you actually have to do a tap test. So grab a drumstick, tap the top of the drum, and see how your snare wires respond. That's actually pretty good. Doesn't sound choked to me. Now, if I make it too tight, let's say I go all the way up, or as far as I possibly can. Now you can hear in particular when you go to the edge of the drum that those snare wires sound choked. It's almost as if there's too much tension on them because there is too much tension. So lower your snare wires if you hear a sound like that and back it out. Go the opposite way. Again, counterclockwise if you're using a P88 throw off. That might be too loose. Yeah. So you can hear that there's a little bit of an additional rattle. You can even hear it when I'm talking. I went a little too loose there. So we're going to tighten just a little bit. Try it again. Check 1, 2. That's actually pretty good. Let's go a hair more though. So that's maybe 2 or 3 extra clicks. So that sounds really good. Now that is around the tuning range that I would prefer for this particular drum. So I am going to leave it, and it is now time to do a comparison from the old heads to the new heads. Now, one thing to consider with the before and after video is that this new head on the drum is slightly different than that stock head from Ludwig. Because of that, the overtone characteristics are going to be slightly different. Of course, you can alter the drum by putting some kind of dampening on it, whether that's a piece of gaff tape, a moon gel, or you can go to an extreme and put a big fat snare drum on it. But with the before and after video, I wanted the drum to be in a wide open tuning so you can hear that difference. Now, although the Remo Ambassador X coated head is my head of choice for the batter side, I still think the controlled sound coated is a better choice for this drum. Now, although this is a copper metal drum, the pewter plating does wake it up just a little bit. I know with a controlled sound head, you don't get as many overtones as you would with an Ambassador X coated. Now, although you may be hearing the overtones with this controlled sound head, they would just be intensified a bit more with an Ambassador X coated. That might be the sound that you're going for, but for me, I would like it to be tamed a little bit like it is with the controlled sound. One final thing, when it comes to tuning drums, at the end of the day, it's like anything else with an instrument. The only way that you get better at it is by doing it more and more. You also need to trust your instincts and your ears. There are a ton of different tuning tools out there, from certain drum keys that stop turning once you get to a certain tension, and even some devices that act like a guitar tuner but for your drum. Keep in mind there are a ton of variables that can alter the results from those tools. You could have bent tension rods, or even one particular lug doesn't have as much grease in it as the other, so it's a little bit harder to turn. Sometimes those tuning devices aren't picking up the actual natural tone. Either way, at the end of the day, whatever makes you feel more comfortable with tuning a drum, whether you're using tools or not, go ahead and do that. But continue to use these ears and continue to do it. Over time, you'll notice it gets easier. So thank you so much for checking out this video. Please make sure that you leave a comment below and let me know what you think of the new head combination on this drum. While you're here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell notification so you are notified anytime I upload a new video. Until next time, see you later.